I think we're seeing the impacts in the news cycles every day. We have mass shooters on the rise, people who are filled with rage and end up going and hurt innocent people. Why? Because their innocence has been hurt and nobody cared. Nobody recognized the wound. Nobody dealt with the wound. No one took ownership and asked for forgiveness and made that wound right and healed it. We see more people committing suicide now more than ever. There's more violence and abuse on the rise. There are people being sold into human trafficking in the millions because people have cut off their emotional connection to one another and they don't have empathy of what another goes through or suffers. I wanted to talk today about the topic of abandonment because many people don't even have the awareness that it's something they've experienced. And the reason I feel it's really important to talk about is because society is seeing a lot of violence on the rise. We're seeing mass shootings, we're seeing suicide, and all these things come from someone who is really suffering inside and doesn't know how to handle that suffering. We are social creatures that our security is derived from how well we integrate with the community around us, how well we're loved, understood, accepted for who we are, supported in our development. All of those things are very core needs for a human being to develop well. Now, it doesn't mean that if you've experienced abandonment that you can't develop well. It just means that in order to be able to go beyond that pain and that trauma and those difficulties, you have to really own that you did experience those things, and then you have to uncover what was born through that experience, what feelings within your body, what communications within your psyche, what did those impact? It's important to understand there are many ways that a human can feel abandoned. It doesn't always mean they've been physically abandoned. That's oftentimes in our culture the way that we identify abandonment. Say if a child is abandoned and goes to an orphanage or a foster care home, then we would consider that child an abandoned child. However, there are many other ways to abandon a child or an adult. Sometimes that happens through a physical abandonment. Sometimes it happens through a psychological abandonment, and sometimes it happens through an emotional abandonment. When a child feels emotionally abandoned, that no one cares about their feelings or their experience, maybe they're getting beat up at school or people are tormenting them, and if they don't have a caregiver to come home to share that fear with, to say, hey, this is what's happening to me, I'm so scared, I don't know what to do. If they say have a caretaker at home that will not care about what they're going through or maybe not safe to talk about these things to, then what happens is that the trauma becomes even greater than the trauma that they had where you were physically not there when they were young. The wound that the person has to learn how to not only live with, but heal. There's also something that I've identified called psychological abandonment. This can happen whenever the child is not supported properly. Let's take, for instance, you have a child that you would love to be a star athlete. You see potential in them. You think that they would just be so happy if they would be an athlete, and you're really pushing them to do better and show up better because you see the future, and the future is big. They can go get those trophies, go make that money, like be someone that you're excited for them to become. This can actually create a trauma pattern for children because they learn conditional patterns of love. Rather than being loved unconditionally, the psychology becomes, if I perform, you'll accept me and love me, which is the most important thing to me. So I'm going to push myself beyond those limits, not even having a chance to get to know myself and who I might really be innately and naturally, in order for you to validate me. And that becomes the internal drive. In some cases, if your core needs are not met, those wounds can harden an individual. It can help them to turn off their feelings and their sensory emotions. Now that's really important to understand because your sensory emotions are here to help you build intelligence over your lifetime and be able to think and see beyond problems that not even your mind can fully perceive. Because we have a society that stigmatizes abandonment and doesn't necessarily help people to understand what it is, there are a lot of people that just choose the hard way. They'll say, I'm gonna become the bully. Rather than being the one who gets beat up, I'll go beat up all the kids on the playground or all the kids in my corporate, competition setting and do what I will with my own power and my own might and strength. So sometimes when people have this wounding, they'll harden and they'll go into performance types of situations to get their needs met for validation rather than be vulnerable. There's a hardening of the heart that happens and a closing up of the openness to life. It becomes much more of a calculated living person where they're calculating what they can get from where. People who have hardened themselves feel that that's their coping mechanism that helps them deal with the expectations of success in life and just keep doing what they have to do to win at life, which oftentimes just really robs them of designing a life that feels natural to them and in alignment with their real potential and gifts. There's another phenomenon that can happen when someone becomes emotionally hardened and turns off that awareness that they do have these needs and they are hurting, and that can be narcissism. Let's just take, for example, a child whose parents travel and they've been left with caregivers and nannies and such. That child hasn't had enough time to bond with mommy and daddy, to really feel their energy and know who they are in character and strength, and really feel the softness of who they are and feel that unconditional acceptance and love and joy and the lightness of being with one another. When a person's emotionally unavailable, they oftentimes know that and they will try to recover those deficits by giving material to the other person. And this is how some children come to adapt towards that coping mechanism. They'll say, oh, okay, well, I know that when mommy and daddy come back home, they bring me all these gifts. The thing is those gifts are totally insignificant to the child because what the child really, really wanted was time with their parents, and nothing can replace that. But if they do get those gifts, oftentimes those gifts can almost become weaponized, where the child realizes, aha, I know you know that you didn't give me what I need, so I'm going to make you pay for that by constantly getting you to buy me things. I'm going to control you the way that you allow me to because you're making this relationship about material replacement for those needs being met rather than actual intimacy and real connection. Material can never replace what the maternal and paternal connection can give to you. And many people psychologically in this scenario will just conform and say, oh, this is how the world is, so I'm just going to be the best at it. They will choose how to step into their power in a way that doesn't allow them to feel vulnerable. So narcissism can be born by the child turning off his feelings and his vulnerabilities and his empathic connection to others, and all of that gets just shut off when the child doesn't have that ability to connect naturally. There is another way that abandonment wounds can affect us. Rather than harden themselves and shut themselves off, they will become more empathic and they will try to be the change they want to see in the world. They'll go out there meeting the world with those wounds and needs, hoping that if they show the beauty of their light of soul and they give and give and give, that people around them will see this beauty and this giving and will give back to them in the same way. But it doesn't typically happen. Most people out there will just take from a person like that rather than give them what they actually need, which is unconditional love and acceptance These seeking behaviors can really cause people to endure a lot more trauma than just from their childhood, because now you have no boundaries, you have no visibility into why people might be befriending you or harming you, why people may not be emotionally available to you. A seeking person with abandonment wounds will actually be the perfect setup to walk into people abusing you, manipulating you, and exploiting you, because you have no vetting system intact. You have nothing inside of you that says, gee, I don't even know if you're a trustworthy person. Gee, I feel valid on my own, but I really want to get to know you. Those things are kind of missing until you go through your work to really recover yourself. You don't have the level of wisdom that you could have. And so these seeking behaviors, they're like huge beacons that go out to like other predators and narcissists who will definitely take advantage of that naivete. If you have abandonment wounds that haven't been dealt with, they haven't been healed, they haven't been acknowledged, then that can make you a very insecure, anxious person. That can make you have panic attacks. You can experience PTSD. There is a lack of belief in yourself. You can have communications that come from you at different levels that work against your best interest. Let's say if you were told you will never be good enough, then you'll have a psychological criticizer inside of your ego mind that reminds you that you're never good enough. No matter what you do, no matter what you try to achieve, you'll never be good enough. You can have communications that tell you you're not acceptable, you're fat, you're disgusting, we're ashamed of you. When we deal with abandonment wounds, oftentimes those wounds trigger us to seek the approval of an archetype we didn't previously get approval from. An example of that would be promiscuity. When people give their bodies freely away to one another very easily without realizing what a serious thing that is. A lot of times people do this because they have never been fully accepted by their caregiver in a way that made them feel valid. So there might be a history where they got a lot of, say, male attention, and this male attention made them feel really good, really special, really early in life. And they all of a sudden felt different than their peers because they were getting noticed and their peers weren't. And they figured out that by being more sexy or more forward or just letting people have their way with their bodies, that they were always going to get invites to things. They were always going to be the one that people were excited to see, and they were never going to be alone. And that's what they're trying to sort of mask, is this feeling of aloneness. They feel this overwhelming emptiness inside. And so they keep finding new partners to kind of try to meet that need with. But of course, when you share your body and you give away something so special and precious to someone who doesn't see it that way, what you really do is actually traumatize yourself even more, because now the subconscious communication in that is that, yeah, you really weren't special to this person either, but they enjoyed you for what you gave them, but you didn't matter. No matter how people try to meet that need, they'll go back to this original pattern of wounding, which was caused already by them being exploited or not being supported in their needs at all. And so they open themselves up to further exploitation by others who have no greater abilities to validate them either. The validation really has to happen within oneself. Every time we meet the world with our wound, what we do is open up an opportunity for people to make that wound even worse. It's like if you get a huge gash on your arm, right, and you put the Baxitracin on it and a bandage, and you're trying to let it heal and clean itself, and then you go and you do something with a bunch of friends and somebody rips that Band-Aid off and is deciding like they're gonna mess with it. That's kind of what you're doing. You're just letting people just mess with your wounding. And if you're not conscious that it is a wound speaking and that it actually needs love and that you're the one that can actually heal that, you won't really know, and you'll just keep wounding yourself, and that wound will keep growing and it'll keep speaking louder and louder, because the idea of it speaking at all is so that you can know it exists to heal it. The only pathway is self-respect and self-love and self-validation. and really understanding what you've been through so that you can be very careful that you don't allow anybody else into your life that's going to do that to you again. But if we have lots of friends around us that are also partaking in the same toxic behaviors and disrespecting themselves in such a way, then you end up thinking that's normal. And that's very dangerous because now you've just acclimated to very unhealthy behaviors to get those needs met. And now your psychology is involved as well, which is much harder to get out of it once your psychology thinks that that's just normal and that's how things are. What impact can this wound have on us as a society? Well, I think we're seeing the impacts in the news cycles every day. We have mass shooters on the rise, people who are filled with rage and end up going and hurt innocent people. Why? Because their innocence has been hurt and nobody cared. Nobody recognized the wound. Nobody dealt with the wound. No one took ownership and asked for forgiveness and made that wound right and healed it. We see more people committing suicide now more than ever. There's more violence and abuse on the rise. There are people being sold into human trafficking in the millions because people have cut off their emotional connection to one another and they don't have empathy of what another goes through or suffers. They can only see what they want. Abandonment wounds are largely generational. Many people are just carrying on the generations of cycles of abuse because that's all they've known, that's all they've been taught, it's how their families have always been. And we're coming into a time now when we have this opportunity to change those cycles. And it's more and more important that we address the pain inside of ourselves so that we can make it a safer, more happy, joyous living experience for everyone. What can we do to heal this wound? Well, there are many things that one can do, and what is needed at different times is not always going to be the same. So it's going to be important for you to tune in when you feel like this wound is speaking within yourself or within a relationship or an experience that you're having. I suggest you tune into your heart and ask yourself, why are you feeling this way? Really tune in inside of yourself. Take that energy you feel and move it inside and ask yourself, what is it that is speaking? And you might hear, I'm not good enough. You're a loser. You're stupid. You might hear what the wound was created from, the originating source of communication or deprivation. That will be speaking. It'll speak in the mind. It'll speak in the body. You'll feel that. You'll hear that if you tune into that. And in the mind, it might sound more like a criticizer, a judger, a harsh critic, something that speaks of your own annihilation. In the body, it feels much more like, why doesn't anybody love me? What's wrong with me? Why can't I be good enough? But it also might show up as rage and hatred and wanting to destroy everyone around you. I mean, if you're narcissistic and you got wounded, you would rather burn the whole kingdom down than restore it, because that wound is what you've grown to be attached to, rather than the part that wants you to get beyond the wound and find who you are beyond that. So really it's important when you're trying to heal that wound to really get in touch with those communications that are inside of your body and mind and really hear what they're telling you. Let's just say, for instance, your mind tells you you're stupid. Then it's important to go into your heart and say, do I believe that's true? Do I really believe that I'm stupid? Is that really true? Really allow yourself to feel that and ask that. Your body will say, no, you're not. No, you're not. And at that point, you have this opportunity to reprogram your thought. Once you've made that decision, you can say, no, I don't believe that. I'm not stupid. Another thing that is important for healing the wounds is making sure that whoever is doing the wounding You've either created a boundary for yourself or you've spoken your truth to let that person know this is no longer acceptable and I have to move into a different way of working with you or being with you for my protection. I know this is really difficult for a lot of people. This is sometimes the hardest step, especially for people pleasers. But I assure you that when you do take inventory of your life and the people around you, especially if you're like a people-pleasing person, a seeking person, then generally most of the people around you are just there to use you. So really taking inventory of why people are in your life and really making space for new people to enter eventually once you've done your self-work and you really have chosen to love yourself for a while and heal yourself. It's important for you to take ownership of that truth and grow it up and mature it. And that's entirely possible. Your life can be an amazing life once you know what your value is and your worth is in the world and you stop letting people take advantage of you through your abandonment wound. Thank you for spending time with me. I hope you found this valuable, and I look forward to talking to you more about things that can help heal us emotionally and develop emotional intelligence.